So comprehension checks. When we think of comprehension checks, we generally think of classroom. We think of something we're going to do in the classroom, and we think of something we're going to do with our students. There's something that our teacher generates. It's something that, it's an intervention that our teacher takes part in or leads. Let's start off by just talking very, very briefly about the goals of a comprehension check. And then we're not going to talk anything more about theory. We're going to talk about classroom interventions, techniques, and examples. I'll start off with comprehension checks. What do they provide? What do they do? Let's talk about quickly 3 things that a comprehension check should do. It should provide the teacher with a qualitative assessment of students' understanding of some specific concept or learning task. Qualitative, because it's casual, it's a casual intervention. Assessment, again, because it's a casual relationship, to get an idea rather than quantitative. A comprehension check should also tell our student how they're understanding the material. It's something that should be a form of self-evaluation that our students should be able to get something out of. And very importantly, a comprehension check should be a way of modeling language. And particularly in a place like Korea, we have many Korean teachers, it's a good way to model language that's safe. That said, let's go on and talk a little bit about comprehension checks and some of the various things that we can do in our classroom. One of the most common things that we use comprehension checks for is monitoring vocabulary understanding. And what we want to do with this is to focus on the key vocabulary and employ a kinesthetic learning environment. Research will show that this will increase our students' understanding by upwards of 30%. Very simple process. So let's start on the back page of the handout. And we'll see just a page that I photocopied from one of our more commonly used textbooks. This would be for a young learner. Unit 10, the giraffe. Have you ever seen a giraffe?
Yes.
Yes. Where did you see a giraffe? The zoo. Okay, the zoo. The zoo. What does a giraffe look like? Is a giraffe tall?
Yes.
It's tall? Can you show me tall?
Tall.
Tall. Okay, tall. Does a giraffe have a long neck or a short neck?
Long.
A long neck. Do you have a neck? Yes? Is your neck long or short? Short. Can you show me your neck? Okay, my point is that by getting students to interact that way, is reinforcing the idea of the comprehension. It's reinforcing the idea of the comprehension check, and the kinesthetic involvement has a very big impact on their long-term remembering, their long-term recognition. So I'm going to be using this example over and over again as we talk about different forms of comprehension checks and how to apply them. So having seen this, we can probably move on back to the first page. The example 1. What color? Now, obviously this isn't color, but imagine it is. We've got a giraffe, it's orange and it's yellow. What color is the giraffe? Orange and yellow. Can you show me orange? Can you show me something around in the room that's orange? Well, sort of, a little bit, right? Can you show me brown? Can you show me brown? Again, these kinds of comprehension checks tied to a tactile response will increase the perceptive medium-term recognition by up to 30%. And it's pretty clear in this area that this actually takes place. The research is sound. Another example I'm going to use. I'm going to use this sentence fairly regularly throughout this demonstration. Big yellow jaguars eat quickly on the ground. This is a pattern sentence. This is a typical pattern sentence that we would be employing for a beginner, mid-beginner type, or that kind of level. It's a pattern sentence. Big yellow jaguars. We have big and yellow jaguars. We have our noun phrase. We have a nice verb phrase with a verb and an adverb. And then we have a prepositional phrase. Big yellow jaguars eat quickly on the ground. I've probably at this point gotten my students to form this sentence and produce this sentence because we're using pattern sentences in this application. So a student has come up with this sentence. He's written it down. Now I'm going to make sure that everybody in the class understands this. Can you show me big? Big. Can you show me big? Yes. Can you show me yellow? Where's yellow? The back of the room. Yellow. Yes, yellow. All right. Can you show me yellow? What does a jaguar look like? Can you show me what a jaguar looks like? Okay. Remember, you're talking about grade 2 or 3 students, or you're talking about young learners probably here. So this should be something that they'll be attracted to. Can you show me eat? What does eat mean? Show me eat. 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 Can you show me quickly? Eat quickly? Really fast. Eating quickly. I'm going to go on to the next part of the sentence then, and I'm going to say, can you tell me where the ground is? Where's the ground? Can you show me the ground? Don't do this. Okay, don't do that. Just as an example. Okay. Can you very carefully get on the ground and sit on the ground? Good. Look at my grade 2 students eating quickly on the ground. Okay. Does that make sense? What I'm saying is that by producing this tactile response through the pattern sentence, I'm going to get a much, much stronger appreciation for the meaning. And this is the biggest problem that we tend to have in Korea. Our students memorize the sentence, they memorize the words, but they lose reality with the actual meaning. By acting this out, our medium-term memory, this will actually transfer from short-term memory into medium-term memory because we paired it with a strong tactile response. This tactile response will make it far, far more lasting. It's also something that we can review, we can repeat easily. When we do repeat it, we'll be repeating it very explicitly in context because they've done it. And this is contextualized learning. This is no longer about just memorizing something. This is about doing something. And so now, this eating quickly becomes contextualized because they can draw on it from their previous experience, from their previous knowledge. Okay, makes sense a little bit? Good. We're going to talk a lot about tactility in this, and particularly for young learners, but this also applies to older learners because even us old people have strong tactile referencing. Let's take a look at, well, that's comprehension checks for vocabulary. And vocabulary then is pretty easy to understand. Let's talk about comprehension checks for grammar, for structural reinforcement. We basically have 3 areas that we use comprehension checks for. One is going to be for meaning reinforcement, which is probably usually vocabulary. The other reason is going to be for structural reinforcement. That's going to be for grammar. Do you teach grammar?
Yeah.
Sure we do. We want to be able to reinforce that grammar in context rather than just simply as parts of speech. And then also, we want to have comprehension checks for reinforcement, for meaning, for inference, for understanding. So let's go on and let's move to our structural type. We've talked a little bit about this for vocabulary. Let's talk about this a little bit now in terms of grammar. Let's go back to the same example pattern sentence. Big yellow jaguars eat quickly on the ground. To do this with grammar, I am going to take each part of speech and code it a different color. So I might make the adjectives yellow or gold. I might take the noun and it might be green. I'm going to take the verb and it might be red. I might take the adverb and make it brown, and black for the prepositional phrase. Now, this is obviously just a form of scaffolding, providing a temporary support structure for our students to recognize and help them see the relationships. But I want my students to learn and be able to recognize the relationships within the sentence. Big yellow jaguars eat quickly on the ground. Which words are the adjectives? Big and yellow. Big and yellow. What do adjectives do? They modify. Sure, they describe. They describe something. Really good. Are jaguars big? Yes. Can you show me big? Big. Okay, big. Are jaguars yellow? Yes. They're describing the jaguar. Can you show me yellow? Yes. We point to something yellow. What else can jaguars be? Fast. Jaguars can be fast. A fast jaguar. Now, what I've done there is I've said, yes, jaguars can be fast, and then I've modeled it as it would appear in the noun phrase. A fast jaguar. A big, fast jaguar eating quickly on the ground. What else can jaguars be?
Scary.
Scary. Big, scary jaguars. Yes, big, scary jaguars eating quickly on the ground. I probably do 2 or 3 examples. I try to draw in 2 or 3 examples to get students to see the relationship as they add their own adjectives. Hungry, for example. Sure. I go on to the next one. What is the verb? The verb is eat. Yeah, eat. It's the action word. It's the action word. It tells what's happening, doesn't it? It tells what's happening. Good. What else? All right, so the verb tells what's happening. What are the jaguars doing? They're eating. They're eating. What else could jaguars do?
Swim.
Run, swim. Big yellow jaguars running quickly. Big yellow jaguars swimming quickly. Good. Good. Can you show me running? Running. Can you show me swimming? Swimming. I always want to try to get in some kind of tactile response in every set. The big tactile, it doesn't have to be a big tactile response, but some kind of a tactile response that grounds our students to the concept, that makes it a little bit more permanent in terms of their recognition. One small, little tactile response goes a long way. And of course, with young kids, we want to be careful it doesn't become too tactile. You can get out of hand pretty easily. But we do want to make sure that at least one tactile response for every set like this occurs. It will increase that recognition substantially. We can move on to do the same thing with the adverb. Quickly. What is the adverb? Quickly. Can you show me quickly? What does quickly mean? Right? And I'll get you to do that. I'll get you to mimic that because I want to gain that tactile response, reinforcing the meaning of the word. So the jaguars are eating. How are they eating? Quickly. They're eating quickly. Good. They're eating quickly. Can you show me eating quickly? Sure. Okay. And our kids will show us eating quickly. Eating quickly. Good. Jaguars eating quickly. What is the prepositional phrase here? On the ground. I'm not going to break it up into this point. Normally, I'm not going to break it up into a preposition and an object of a preposition. I'm not going to break the noun phrase into parts. I'm going to keep the preposition as one concept at this point. So, can you tell me where the jaguars are eating? Where are they eating? On the ground, on the ground. Can you show me on the ground? Can you carefully get on the ground? Good. Where are you? On the ground. Good. Look at my second graders eating quickly on the ground. Again, this kind of response with the tactility is going to reinforce very strongly. And it not only reinforces the vocabulary here, but it's reinforcing the pattern relationship, the grammatical components. We know now that learning grammar is important. We understand that. But it's more than just learning things like adverbs and adjectives. We know, for example, that you all know this. We can take one word and it can function in 4 different categories, right? We can take the word winter. Winter can be a noun. Winter is my favorite season. It can be an adjective, right? The winter storm. It can be a verb. Angus cattle, winter well in Colorado. It can be an adverb. It can even be adverbial. The boat was winter stored in Dryden. So getting winter stored is not a compound. Winter is obviously a modifier because it can be deleted. And it's telling us when. It's an adverb. So getting students to see this relationship and to draw it to meaning, like we're trying to do here, is key in English to getting them to understand the complexities of grammar rather than just memorizing parts of speech. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to functionalize it. And we do that through these simplified comprehension checks. The tactility portion of the comprehension check is going to reinforce the meaning and the understanding tremendously. Okay? Just a couple of ideas there. Now, when we go on, we'll move on to the next section, and we're going to talk about comprehension checks for concept reinforcement, This means for inferencing, for understanding meaning. And again, so that there's no confusion, I'm going to use the same pattern sentence. Big yellow jaguars eat quickly on the ground. At this point, my comprehension checks are not going to be aimed explicitly towards vocabulary or grammar, but towards understanding meaning. Do you like to eat? Yes? Do you think jaguars like to eat? You bet, I think they do too. Do you think the jaguars are happy? Yes. Why are they happy? Because they're eating. That's exactly right. How are the jaguars eating? They're eating quickly, aren't they? They're eating quickly. Why do you think they're eating quickly? Maybe, yeah, because they're hungry. They're hungry. The jaguars are hungry. When you're hungry, do you eat quickly? Now you see, what I've done is I've turned it around to go back to their own experience, so that they all know what it's like for them to eat, to be hungry, and they eat quickly. I'm trying to draw on their previous experience to ensure that the meaning is fully understood, fully comprehended. When you eat quickly, when you are hungry, do you eat quickly? Yes. Show me how you eat when you're hungry. You have a bowl of ramen and you're really hungry. Show me how you eat. Yeah, really quickly. There you go. Slurping, yeah. So, in this way, what I'm doing is I'm reinforcing the meaning. And you can see here, this is totally contextual. This, again, has a very strong tactile response, a tactile and kinesthetic response. And this is, again, going to reinforce that meaning very strongly. In each one of these sets, I'm going to try to employ at least one kinesthetic application, even for adults. We know that it works for children. Kinesthetic learning works just as well for us old people. And so for adult learners, it's the same thing. The trouble is with adult learners, they're less likely to, act out. like eating quickly. But once you start to get them to do it, if you can get them to do it, the results will be far more encouraging for both you and the student. Some other examples. Do you think Mary's happy? Yes. Why is Mary happy? It's her birthday. Again, if we've read a passage that talks about this, this is just reinforcing. All right, I'm going to maybe ask, are you happy on your birthday?
Yeah.
No. Not really. I'm too old. I don't want any more birthdays. Yeah. We've lost count already. We're getting younger now. And once our students get to a little bit higher level, we can start to ask some more opinionated types of comprehension checks in this area. Do you think John has a good job? Yes. Why? Because he makes lots of money. Lots of money. No. Why? He never sees his family. He's always at work. You know, we can start to elicit our students' own opinions there. So with this kind of a thing, again, our goal is to try to bring it into the context of our students' own experience, their own knowledge. Okay? So at this point, I'm just going to break for a minute and ask, are there any questions? Yes?
Would you be using the meta-language with your students? Like you said, what's the prepositional phrase? Would you be asking that question
Yes.
with your students or just with us?
I would. And the reason because I wouldn't necessarily be doing that if I was in the States, in an ESL environment. But certainly here in Korea, because grammar is such a big part of our curriculum, I would say yes. And we've seen that even kids that are in grade 2 are picking up the grammar, the structural grammar this way very, very clearly. At grade 2, they're able to anticipate and tell whether winter is an adjective or a noun based on the sentence. And that's a strong, that's a strong indicator of success.
You talked about if you can get the students to do text responses, how do you deal, how would you turn, a negative, a student who are giving you negative feedback by not doing textile feedback, how would you turn it into a positive environment?
Yeah, some students are going to be a little bit more difficult to work with. So in that kind of a situation, I suppose that the best way is going to be just try to limit the tactility. And we're going to talk about several ways to do that. One of the best ways is going to be starting with a closed-ended question and then move to an open-ended question. We'll talk about that in a minute as a strategy, where we get them to just answer yes or no first. And then once we've answered yes or no, then we can move on to a more open-ended or more responsive question. Breaking that first, getting that first initial response is going to be key. So a simple yes or no answer and then following it up will often work. Yes?
Hi there. I really like all this activity with the asking and answering the questions, because I find constantly asking questions and getting answers, and even working toward turning that around and getting the students to make questions. It's very useful for a number of reasons, and one of them being one function, another one might be to be learning habits of speech. So I really like this. But I was thinking, the example you've given here, the scenario you've created of the lesson here, it seems to me, this sample is designed for teaching really young kids. And when you're teaching really young kids, I think you're also teaching them some concepts, life concepts. So I would change this somewhat for older, for 12 plus, because we don't have to teach them, the idea of jaguar running, and they probably know that exists, and they know what that is.
I would agree with you to an extent, but I think that even with the age consideration, adults can still benefit from this at the low beginner level. Because at the low beginner level, balancing all that is very difficult. They can understand eating quickly very well in Korean, but understanding it in English can still be difficult. Understanding it in a new language can be difficult. Demonstrating it will again be a positive response. But you're probably right. It would only be for our older learners, only at a very low level of English proficiency. I would agree.
Have you seen success like with the required freshman, language requirement class at university where their levels could easily be this level?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen success getting them to actually, use their hands and stuff in front of other students?
It's hard at first.
I mean, trust is obviously the main
Yeah.
issue, but
Obviously, the biggest thing is that it's going to take modeling from you, the teacher.
yeah,
You're going to have to take the lead, and you're going to have to be the actor.
yeah.
My experience has that it has been successful, but not in the first couple weeks.
Right.
It takes a little while to get used to them, for them to get used to you. And you have to be something of an extrovert. You have to be something of a showman
Right.
to start with. And then my success has been pretty complete.
Okay.
But for the first couple of weeks, it's a challenge.
And I just wanted to add, with this, with my students, which are at a much higher level, I could say old politicians govern whatever. And I
Right.
could make this a much higher level and still be effective.
Yeah, remember, this is just a pattern that you have to adapt this to
Yeah.
your particular learning situations, to your classroom situations, absolutely.
I taught in Mexico.
That's right. Good.
I found that when I first arrived in Korea, the style of CCQs that I used to use when I worked in Europe didn't work in Korea partly because of the education and culture of the students. They're not used to direct questions from the teachers. But if I used to work at a middle school, and using some of the things that you've already mentioned, like the introducing visual aids as well.
Yes.
It's much better. It takes the stress off the student, and it increases their confidence if they've got some kind of visual aid to follow as well, even if it's just using your hands as gestures.
Yeah.
So I have a system like that's present, past, future, and then I can do what you do as well, the long, the short, and
Sure.
and once they get used to that, then I can correct without saying anything. I go to supermarket yesterday. Well, I went to supermarkets and they self-correct.
That's another thing we're going to talk about in a minute, is these hand motions and how you can get away from the verbal cues. And that's an extremely powerful way. Exactly. I agree with you 100%. And one of the things we're going to talk about shortly in this seminar. Thank you. Good. Let's talk just a little bit about our classrooms. Often we do have a lot of students that are going to try to blurt something out. Once you have their trust and they do respond, you'll have the better students blurting out the answer. And so we all know that one of the best ways to do that is the 2 pieces of paper, right? 4 fingers or left hand, right hand, a red card and a green card. Red for yes, red for no, green for yes. And then you can go through. Are Jaguars small? Red card. Right? Are Jaguars big? Green card. That kind of thing. This also allows you as the teacher to be able to sit back and see a little bit more clearly which of your students don't understand and which of them do understand in a choral relationship. Because in this way, the kids that don't understand, they have to look around and they give themselves away very readily. You can get an idea of the percentages involved, roughly estimated, as to how many students understand, how many don't understand. And so I've used this. This has been something that I've managed to use quite successfully, even at, let's say, intermediate levels. In conversation classes, when we're talking, or we're setting students up for the conversation, I can do a little comprehension check after we've had our introduction. And I can get an idea very quickly and far more effectively that way. So there's variations, of course. There's the green and the red card for yes and no. There's a right hand and a left hand. I like the green and red card because the right hand and the left hand, when you're trying to balance language and meaning, can get confusing. Some teachers will use 1 finger for no, 2 fingers for yes, something like that. But still, I like the red card and a green card for that. If you try it, it might be really worthwhile. You might find it works reasonably well in assessing that. We talked a little bit about open-ended and closed-ended questions. And one of the problems that we do have, as this gentleman said, is getting our students to respond, getting them to actually say something. Closed-ended and open-ended sequencing, or that's closed-ended to open-ended sequencing, can encourage student participation, actually, and it creates a safe and more easily generated initial response for students. The initial response seems to be the difficult one to get. Then we can follow it up with an open-ended question. And of course, when you're doing this open-ended rejoinder should be simple. It shouldn't be too difficult, otherwise our students aren't going to take the risk in answering. Again, the example that we used before would work for this. Is Mary happy? Yes. Why is she happy? It's her birthday. You know, it's her birthday. Again, if I ask, why is Mary happy? Many of our students aren't going to say anything. But if I can get them to respond to a yes or no answer first, generally I'll have more success getting them to respond to the open-ended portion of the question. So, does Mary have a pet? Yes. What kind of a pet does Mary have? A little lamb. Whereas just getting them to say a lamb can be very difficult. Once I use the open-ended context, it's often much easier to get them to respond. Is Mary going to church? No. Is Mary going to the beach? Yes. Which beach is Mary going to? Yeah, sure. Yeah, the Wangalei Beach. And what I'm doing that, sure, or any beach, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring beach into some context that they can relate to. It's not just a beach. Now they can tie it into a beach. They can tie it into a previous experience. They can tie it into previous knowledge. And that will, again, reinforce the context that we've been discussing. We're trying to bring things into context through comprehension checks. The next one I want to talk to you is something that is uniquely Korean. And it can be very, very reliable. I use this a lot with a lot of my older students, in my graduate classes particularly. My undergraduate, a few of my undergraduate classes, I don't teach much undergraduate, but most of my graduate classes are really, they show very strong reaction to this. When we have Korean students, we tend to have students that are very visual learners. They're extremely visual learners. And we have a classroom passive culture. In a classroom passive culture, it means they're not going to ask. They don't want to really interact. They want to sit there and hide. What happens here is really unique to our culture here in Korea. My students are all paying attention. They're all looking at me. They're focused on it. When my student stops understanding, when their comprehension goes down to zero, they break eye contact. They don't start taking notes. They don't start to read. They don't start to page through books. They just break eye contact and look down. They just sit there. Their eyes are open. They're not doing anything. They're just sitting there. And at that point, I know I've got to go back and I've got to explain again. And often in my classes, I can come to a certain point in a lecture and instantly I'll see 4 or 5 students at the same point. When I go back to where they did understand, they'll perk up again, they'll pick up. Now, the only way you can verify this is to try it in your class. And once you've actually done this and experienced it, you'll be amazed. Because it is really, really amazing. It is reliable. And I use it a lot. Oftentimes, I have some graduate students here in this class, and I'll often repeat myself. And you know, I'm not repeating myself because I want to hear myself say the same thing over again. It's because I've seen several of my students just break that contact. It's a very regular and predictable response. Now, this is a kind of comprehension check too, isn't it? Because we're using body language to be able to determine the level of our students' understanding, when they're understanding, where they quit understanding, and we can return back and regain their understanding very readily because we can determine it quickly, instantly, in real time. Try it. I think you'll be amazed. It really works. It's one of my favorites. And I'm going to move quickly because I have one more that I'd like to talk to you about, and it's a little bit, it'll take a little bit of time to explain. And I want to talk about setting listening and speaking goals. This is for receptive language. Often when your students are listening or speaking, when your students are listening or reading, you give them, let's say you give them an intensive reading assignment. One page they're going to read. Now most of your Korean students, when they start to read this page, they start out with, let's say, about 100% attention. By the time they get down to the bottom of that page, they're probably waning. They aren't able to concentrate. They aren't understanding. And if we look at MIR, magnetic resonance imaging brain scans, we'll see when they start out at a base level of 100%, we call that level a base level, 100% activity, it'll go down by 2/3 by the time they get down through a page of reading. So whatever energy, mental focus, and attention they're getting here, it'll be about 1/3 by the time they get down to the bottom. And we can see this on brain scans. So our question is, how do we get them to be able to focus more and understand more? And the research has been very practical because this actually is reinforced with medical research and medical confirmation. What we can do is give 2 to 3 listening goals or reading goals before they start on the actual activity. The key here is this is for the first time they listen to it or read it. After that, they can move on to other activities. This is just for the first time they encounter this passage. What we do is we break the passage up into 2 or 3 sections, and we'll take one goal from each point, one fact. The fact that we take, the listening goal should be obvious, not something hidden, not something that is obscure. It should be something that is totally 100% obvious, something we will recognize instantly, that the brain will recognize subconsciously. And we can see this happening on a brain scan. What happens is our student reads down, and they start off at 100%. By the time they get down to here, they're probably at about 70% recognition. They hit that first goal, that subconscious goal that they were set up to understand, to recognize, and the energy in the brain spikes. It'll go up 20%, sometimes as much as 30% in young learners. Because once their brain recognizes that information, it's subconscious, it spikes that energy and starts that energy, the brain recognition, to function more completely. By the time they start reading, now they're back up to, they've gone from 100% to 70%. By recognizing that first goal, it boosts it up to 90%. By the time they get halfway through, they're down to maybe 65%. By seeing that second comprehension, that second listening goal, that second reading goal, their brain automatically, subconsciously boosts again. And their recognition increases back up to the 90% of that relationship. And again, the pattern repeats itself later on. Now, when we do this, keep in mind that this should be for the first reading or listening only. not for subsequent readings or listenings. If we're doing an intensive reading assignment, we would do this for the first time they read it. The second time, then we can look for obscure facts. We can look for details. The first time is just to get students to understand, recognize, to build their basic comprehension for that initial connection with the content. Does that make sense?
You would just say, if you give them, say, okay, around line 15, I want you to jot something on the margin, or?
What I would do is, before they start reading, I want you to listen for 3 things. I want you to pay attention for 3 things when you read this passage. I want you to answer 3 questions. Is Mike's friend a boy or a girl?
Just mentally, not on a worksheet.
Well, just mentally.
Yeah.
Just mentally. Totally mental, because this has to be recognized subconsciously. And when the subconscious brain recognizes that subliminal comprehension check, the energy, the measurable energy that focuses on comprehension in the brain spikes. Now that spike is temporary, so we have to try to apply that in a way that it's repeated.
It's like a reset button.
Yeah, it's like a reset button, exactly. It's like a reset button. One of the things that we really need to do here is to keep it to a maximum of 3 comprehension questions. More than 3 tends to confuse students. 2 or 3, 3 is a maximum, 2 or 3 is ideal. Our brain seems very capable of understanding those 2. And again, keep it simple, something the brain is going to understand automatically and subconsciously. Yes?
Can this methodology be used on test environment? Is that?
I suppose you could apply it to testing. I'm not sure how I would apply it to testing, but I'd have to think about that one. But I'm sure it could be applied. I'm probably not prepared to answer that question directly without considering it, though. So it's just about time for us to go. I want to, if I can just take 2 minutes, 1 minute. I have one other thing that I'd like to say. This has to do particularly with things like spelling lists and vocabulary lists. When you put in your vocabulary list, when you have your spelling list, and you're presenting it to your students, try not to present things in order. Try not to present words in order, because our students will write them down in order. And when they do, our students like to try to memorize. Our Korean students are very good at pattern memorization techniques. So when you do this, whether it's spelling or whether it's vocabulary, use a random presentation. And you'll find that their recognition will increase, generally in the 20 to 30% range. Just by using, because our, and this is again specific to our Korean culture, because our students are so adept, so wonderfully gifted at memorizing and employing those memorizing strategies. This has been a really quick presentation, and normally in a graduate class I'd spend about 2 hours going through this same material. So this has been very superficial. I hope it's been a little bit enlightening for you, and I hope that it's something that you can bring into your classrooms and try. So thank you very much.